Welcome everyone, I'm Ben, and today I'm taking you to the story of a cold-blooded murder that shocked a quiet community. This event occurred on the 2nd of December, 2022. It took place at a local hunting club in Riceboro, Georgia, and in the context of a ruthless dismemberment, a chilling attempt to erase a life, with the main characters being Nicholas Kassotis and his wife, Mindi Mebane Kassotis. Join me as we uncover the whole story. I hope you'll support us with a like and subscribe to the channel if this is your first time here. The air in the Georgia woods hangs heavy and cold, a silence broken only by the rustle of leaves. It was the 2nd of December, 2022, a day like any other for a group of deer hunters. They were searching for game, but what they found was something far more sinister, far more inhuman. Deep within the undergrowth of a local hunting club in Riceboro, they stumbled upon the torso of a nude, headless woman. It was a discovery that would haunt them forever, the first piece of a puzzle no one wanted to solve. Investigators would soon realize this was not a complete body, but a collection of remains scattered across a 3 to 4 mile radius, spanning 3 counties. The scene was a grotesque, deliberate act of depravity, a cold-blooded attempt to erase a person from existence. For 5 long months, this woman had no name. She was just a case file, a set of composite sketches, a chilling reminder of a life violently extinguished. Then, a breakthrough genetic genealogy provided a link, and her identity was finally revealed. Mindi Mebane Kassotis, a 40-year-old writer and entrepreneur. The story should have ended with a family finally getting closure, but it was just the beginning. The trail of evidence led investigators to the last person who had seen her alive. They uncovered a web of deception that stretched from the military elite to the shadows of a new life. The prime suspect was not some random monster, but her own husband, Nicholas Kassotis. He was a decorated military lawyer, a former JAG officer with a brilliant legal mind, who was found living in another state under a different name and had already remarried. This was not a crime of passion, this was a calculated, meticulous act. So, the question that screams from the very heart of this case remains unanswered. Was the dismemberment of a body the work of a cold-hearted killer, or a deliberate strategy by a legal genius to outsmart the very system he once swore to uphold? To understand a crime, you must first understand the people involved. In this case, our focus narrows to 2 individuals whose lives were intertwined in a complex web of ambition and deceit: Nicholas Kassotis and his wife, Mindi Mebane Kassotis. On the surface, Nicholas presented a formidable profile, a man of authority and intellect, a former decorated JAG officer in the U.S. Navy, who had served in Iraq and at the Pentagon. His educational background was equally impressive, with a law degree from Northeastern University and a master's degree from Georgetown, specializing in national and cybersecurity law. He was a former prosecutor, a man who knew the law inside and out, a man who built a career on seeking justice. He was not a reckless individual driven by impulse, but a meticulous and calculated professional. This background makes his alleged actions all the more chilling. What kind of mind trained to uphold the law would commit such a gruesome act? Mindi Mebane Kassotis, at 40 years old, was a writer and entrepreneur. She had her own aspirations and a life separate from her husband's, yet their relationship was entangled in a critical financial struggle, a $1.5 million debt from Nicholas's first divorce. This massive judgment became a powerful, corrosive force, a ticking clock that could destroy everything they had. According to the prosecution, the couple was on the run to escape this crippling debt, and Nicholas saw only one way out. The motive, they argue, was not a fit of rage, but a cold, logical decision to eliminate the financial burden and move on with a new life that Nicholas had already begun, even before Mindi's body was identified. He was arrested while living under an alias and had already remarried, all just months after her death. But the defense paints a different picture, introducing a new and mysterious figure, a man named Jim McIntyre. They claim that Mindi and Nicholas were not running from debt, but from McIntyre, who allegedly controlled Mindi's finances. This places Mindi in a vulnerable position, a victim not only of her husband's alleged violence, but of an unseen, powerful manipulator. So, who was Mindi really? A partner in crime? A victim of circumstance? or something else entirely? The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in the complex web of their past. Was their relationship a partnership in desperation? Or was it a fatal conflict waiting to happen? Was Nicholas Kassotis the protector his defense claims he was? Or was he a ruthless tactician who saw his wife as nothing more than a liability to be disposed of? The crime itself was a masterclass in calculated brutality. It began not in the dark woods where Mindi's body was found, but within the supposed sanctuary of her own home. The medical examiner's testimony painted a horrific picture of what transpired: a vicious assault, a furious, desperate struggle for life. Mindi Mebane Kassotis, a woman of 40, faced an attacker of immense strength and resolve. She fought back, the bruises on her hands and arms speaking volumes about her will to survive. But the struggle was a losing one. The final, fatal blows were delivered with savage force, leaving 9 lacerations on her head, one so deep it fractured her skull. This was not a quick, clean act. This was a sustained personal attack fueled by a cold, deadly intent. But the violence didn't end with her death. The true horror, the part that screamed of a meticulous, analytical mind, began after her last breath. What happened next was the calculated dismemberment of a human body, a gruesome process intended not for rage, but for erasure. The killer didn't just want her gone. He wanted her identity, her life, and the memory of her to vanish without a trace. This was the work of a man who understood forensics, who knew how to cover his tracks and manipulate an investigation. This was a man who had been a military prosecutor, trained to dissect a case, to find the weak points, to build an unbreakable argument. Here, he was applying that same chilling logic to a crime of his own making. The discovery on the 2nd of December 2022 was the culmination of this horrific plan: a body deliberately scattered across a 3 to 4 mile radius, spanning 3 different counties in Georgia. The killer had sought to overwhelm the system, to make identification impossible, and to turn a single murder into a tangled web of unrelated incidents. The fact that he was successful for 5 long months speaks to the clinical precision of his actions. Investigators later used a powerful chemical agent, Blue Star, in the home Nicholas and Mindi shared. The chemical glows in the presence of blood, and what it revealed was a chilling testament to the violence that had taken place. The discovery of plastic tubs, reportedly purchased from a Home Depot, further solidified the theory that this was a planned operation, not a spontaneous crime. Every step, from the brutal assault to the methodical dismemberment and the calculated dispersal of the remains, was executed with an unnerving detachment. This was not a crime of passion, but a crime of chilling, logical expediency. It was a lawyer's approach to murder, where the victim was not just a person, but an obstacle. The brutal injuries, the dismembered remains, the elaborate attempt to conceal the truth, all of it points to a mind that was not in a blind rage, but in cold, ruthless control. An investigator might look at this and say, this was not the act of a man who lost his temper. This was the work of a man who had a problem to solve. And his wife was that. A crime this meticulous demands an equally meticulous investigation. The first and most critical challenge was to give the victim her name back. For 5 months, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation had nothing but a collection of remains and composite sketches, a ghost with no identity. The breakthrough came through the cutting-edge science of genetic genealogy, a tool that linked the DNA from the remains to Mindi's mother, finally giving her a name: Mindi Mebane Kassotis. With a name, the investigation could finally begin. The search led them to her husband, Nicholas Kassotis, a man whose life had become as fractured as the crime scene he was suspected of leaving behind. Nicholas was a ghost himself. He wasn't where he was supposed to be. Detectives discovered he had fled to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where he was living under the alias Nicholas Killian James Start, and had remarried just months after Mindi's death. This behavior, the disappearance, the new identity, the second wife, was not a sign of grief. It was the calculated maneuver of a man trying to erase his past. On May 12, 2023, the manhunt came to a close when he was apprehended and extradited back to Georgia to face the full weight of the law. The evidence gathered during the investigation painted a chilling picture of his preparation. At the home he once shared with Mindi, investigators used Blue Star, a chemical that illuminates even microscopic traces of blood. What they found was a haunting testament to the violence that had occurred there. Prosecutors also found records showing that plastic storage bins, the kind that could easily transport a body, had been purchased from a Home Depot. It was this collection of evidence, from the DNA to the chemical traces and the purchased containers, that formed the bedrock of the prosecution's case. The prosecution's argument was sharp and direct. The motive was a $1.5 million divorce debt from his first marriage. They contended that Nicholas, with his brilliant legal mind, saw Mindi not as a wife, but as a liability, and that he killed her to escape his financial obligations. His experience as a JAG prosecutor, they claimed, gave him the expertise to cover his tracks and attempt to manipulate the system. But what if the prosecution's theory, as compelling as it sounds, isn't the whole story? What if the defense's counter-narrative of a mysterious figure named Jim McIntyre, a man who supposedly controlled Mindi's finances, holds a kernel of truth? What if Nicholas and Mindi were truly on the run from a third party, and this elaborate murder was a smokescreen for something far more sinister? What about the former military prosecutor who flees his life, his identity, and his country to start over? Does a man of his intellect make such a reckless, emotional mistake? Or is every single piece of his behavior a calculated move in a larger, more complex game? The truth is, the prosecution's theory is a straight line, but the defense is offering a maze, and every lie, real or fabricated, could hold the key. A courtroom is a stage where two opposing realities collide, and the jury must decide which story is the truth. For the trial of Nicholas Kassotis, this stage was set for a dramatic showdown between cold, hard facts and a bizarre, cinematic counter-narrative. The prosecution, armed with the physical evidence of Mindi's dismembered body and the damning paper trail of Nicholas's flight and remarriage, presented a straightforward case of murder for financial gain. They argued that Kassotis, a man with a $1.5 million divorce judgment hanging over his head, had a clear and undeniable motive. To them, the crime was not born of madness, but of a calculated, lawyerly strategy to erase a debt and a life simultaneously. They called upon forensics experts to detail the brutal assault and the dismemberment, leaving no doubt about the monstrous nature of the act. But then, the defense took the stand, and the courtroom's reality was turned upside down. Nicholas's attorney introduced a character that sounded like something out of a spy novel, a mysterious, third-party figure named Jim McIntyre. The defense claimed that Nicholas and Mindi were not running from a debt, but were in fact fleeing from this man, who they alleged controlled Mindi's finances. This was a bold and audacious move. The prosecution scoffed at the notion, branding Jim McIntyre a figment of the defense's imagination, a desperate attempt to throw a smoke grenade into the investigation. They argued there was no evidence this man existed in the real world. Yet, the defense persisted, claiming that both Nicholas and Mindi had told people about this man before she disappeared. The tension in the room became palpable. Every cross-examination was a high-stakes poker game, every piece of evidence an attempt to undermine the other side's story. The jury was left to grapple with two completely different versions of events. Was Nicholas Kassotis the ruthless, debt-ridden husband who killed his wife to escape his past? Or was he and his wife both victims of a larger, unseen conspiracy orchestrated by a mysterious Jim McIntyre? The trial has now become a test of credibility. Can the defense provide concrete proof that McIntyre is a real person and not just a convenient scapegoat? Or will the prosecution successfully convince the jury that this is nothing more than the desperate fabrication of an intelligent man trapped by his own deeds? As the testimonies unfold and the judge weighs the admissibility of each piece of evidence, the central question looms over the proceedings. In this modern courtroom drama, with two narratives so far apart, how can the truth possibly be determined? And when a verdict is finally reached, will it truly feel just? Or will the ghost of Jim McIntyre forever cast a shadow of doubt over the final judgment? When we step back from the raw facts of the case, a deeper, more unsettling question emerges about the mind behind the crime. How do we reconcile the two faces of Nicholas Kassotis, the decorated U.S. Navy JAG officer, the highly educated lawyer specializing in national security, with the cold-blooded killer accused of brutally dismembering his own wife? This is not the psychology of a man who snapped under pressure. This is a chilling case study in what happens when a mind trained for logic, strategy, and legal precision is turned toward an act of ultimate evil. The prosecution's analysis is clinical and compelling. They see a man driven by financial desperation, a man with a $1.5 million debt from his first divorce. From this perspective, the murder of Mindi Kassotis was not an act of hate, but a calculated, emotionless decision to eliminate a liability. The gruesome dismemberment was a means to an end, not a display of rage, but a strategic effort to impede forensic identification and buy time for his escape. His subsequent flight to another state, his alias, and his immediate remarriage fit the profile of a classic criminal mastermind who views people as tools and problems to be solved rather than human beings. It suggests a profound lack of empathy, a narcissism so deep it allows him to discard his past and start over without a second thought. But the defense's narrative, though seemingly far-fetched, invites us to consider a different psychological framework. They portray Nicholas not as a predator, but as a victim himself, a man trapped in a dangerous situation and desperately trying to protect his family from a mysterious figure named Jim McIntyre. If this is true, then Mindi's death and the subsequent cover-up would be the tragic result of a panic, a man acting in self-preservation against an unknown enemy. This paints a picture of a man pushed to the very brink, a man whose military training in survival and deception was turned against him in a twisted game of cat and mouse. It would mean that every suspicious act, from the dismemberment to the flight, was not a sign of guilt, but a desperate and misguided attempt to clean up a mess he didn't create. So who was Nicholas Kassotis at his core? A psychopath who saw no value in human life beyond its utility, or a frightened man pushed to the extreme by a threat we cannot see? And what of Mindi? Was she simply a pawn in a financial game, or a willing accomplice in a larger conspiracy? The bruises on her hands and arms, testament to a fight for her life, suggest she was not a passive participant. In the end, the question for us, and for the jury, is not just about guilt or innocence. It's about understanding the type of evil that can exist behind an intelligent, respectable facade, the kind of evil that wears a uniform and holds a law degree. As the courtroom drama reaches its inevitable climax, the future of the Nicholas Kassotis case hangs in the balance. The jury must now retreat to weigh the evidence, to reconcile the physical brutality of the crime with the mental gymnastics of a man who claims he was a victim. Will they be swayed by the prosecution's seemingly unassailable theory of financial desperation, where a $1.5 million debt led a man to murder? Or will the defense's desperate plea about a mysterious Jim McIntyre sow enough doubt to acquit a man who fled his life and remarried in the shadows? The verdict, whatever it may be, will not be the final word. A case so bizarre and unsettling is destined to live on in the public consciousness, a story passed around on social media and debated on true crime forums. The public is fascinated by the fall of a man from grace, a decorated military officer, and an accomplished lawyer, now reduced to the accused in a heinous murder trial. The shocking details of the dismemberment, the alleged financial motive, and the bizarre counter-narrative about a phantom figure all ensure that this story will not soon be forgotten. It will become a cautionary tale, a lesson in how even the most brilliant minds can break under pressure, or how a meticulously constructed life can be a mask for a terrifying reality. For Mindi Mebane Kassotis' family, a verdict of guilty might bring a sense of closure, but it won't bring her back. And for the jury, a decision of not guilty would leave the public with a deeply unsettling question. If not Nicholas, then who? The lingering doubt, the unanswered questions, and the shadow of a third-party killer will forever hover over this case, regardless of the final outcome. In the end, this case becomes less about finding a definitive truth and more about what we, as a society, are willing to accept. Sometimes, justice is not found in the final judgment, but in what people will be forced to believe is true. The case of Nicholas Kassotis leaves us with a terrifying lesson that evil isn't always obvious. It can be hidden behind a facade of success and intellect. A man who was a decorated U.S. Navy officer and a Georgetown-educated lawyer is accused of a crime so heinous, it shatters our perception of integrity. This case forces us to question the very nature of humanity. Can a brilliant mind also harbor a cruel soul? Or is this simply a man pushed to the very brink? We've laid out two conflicting stories: a cold-blooded killer running from a $1.5 million debt, and a desperate man fighting an unseen enemy. After exploring the entire case, we want to hear from you. Which theory do you believe? Could a mind as brilliant as Nicholas Kassotis commit such a brutal and calculated crime? Or is the story of Jim McIntyre the key to a larger conspiracy? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. We're eager to hear what you think. And if this is your first time here, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We'll be back with our next shocking investigation.